What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the Lost Tangent Outpost. My name is Spada, and welcome back to another episode of the MultiVersus Living Roster. This, like the last two episodes, is one that I've been really excited to do. I grew up on all the classic Looney Tunes stuff, so I'm hyped to be able to discuss this. Before we get into it, I want to start today's video by giving a huge shout out to everyone in this small community. Every video you guys show up, you get involved in the comments, you vote in the polls, and you like the videos. I just want to say how grateful I am to you all. I've been doing this as a hobby for the last several months, and it really helps to make it worth it when I see all the support. Not to mention all the awesome comments and everything, so thank you guys. I have something I want to share with you all at the end of today's episode, and that's intended for all of you guys that are the mainstays of this community, so stay tuned for that. All right, and with that, let's jump into it. So Looney Tunes have been around for a very long time. They technically got started in the 1930s, but the version of Looney Tunes that we know really came into fruition around the 30s and into the 60s. It's from this era that characters like Bugs Bunny, Daffy Duck, Porky Pig, and basically all the mainstay Looney Tunes characters hail from. There's a very long and storied history behind these characters and how they were depicted throughout the decades. From the art styles to their personalities, they've definitely had some changes throughout the years. Going back to the 30s, Looney Tunes have always been a really big part of the Warner Brothers family, so it would be no surprise whatsoever that the game was announced with Bugs Bunny in the roster. What is a surprise, however, is that he's the only Looney Tunes character in the roster so far. It's clear that the dev team doesn't want to stop there, given that about a month ago, Tony tweeted this: "Who are the next two Looney Tunes you'd like to see join MultiVersus?" I mean, it's possible that this doesn't mean much, but I think every one of us would be insanely surprised if they didn't include at least one more Looney Tunes character. And as a reminder, we have to limit our additions to one at a time, except in cases of characters that operate like duos like Tom and Jerry, or how we have Mordecai and Rigby in the living roster currently. So today's goal is to pick one more Looney Tunes character to add to our prediction. And it's hard because, like I've said the last couple of weeks, there are an insane amount of options from the Looney Tunes franchise. So the likelihood is that I will probably miss whoever your ideal pick is. It's just not something that I can help. With that though, let's go ahead and get started with Daffy Duck. Look, this is the easiest one from the crew in my opinion. Next to Bugs Bunny, Daffy Duck has to be the most recognizable character from the franchise. He even used to co-host the Bugs Bunny show starting back in the late 60s. Daffy has been around about as long as Bugs Bunny, maybe a little longer, and has changed about as much. Whereas I would call Bugs the fun-loving, mischievous sweetheart, Daffy I think is more, well, let's just call him grumpy.
So, insulting my integrity. Hey, fatso!
But in a lot of ways, Bugs and Daffy are quite similar. They both started out to serve as foils for already existing characters in the Looney Tunes library, and both are famous pranksters. However, as time has gone on, I'd argue that Daffy has found a personality that sets himself apart. Not only because of his anger management issues, but also because he's simply a lot less prank and prop happy. Even if he and Bugs did start out as fairly similar archetypes, as the years went on, and especially with the influence of Chuck Jones, Daffy was transformed into more of an egotistical anti-hero. I think my biggest concern, even though he is my most wanted character from Looney Tunes, is that it's actually really hard to find ways to translate Daffy into a character for MultiVersus, given that most of the time he tries to wield any weapon or fight back against any antagonistic force, he loses. That's his shtick, that he fails almost every time to do anything of any real value. That's what makes him such an interesting character to pit against a character like Bugs, who is almost always successful, no matter how difficult a challenge is placed in front of him. As such, I feel like a moveset for Daffy would have to be almost entirely focused on him injuring himself and only causing damage to his opponent by mere accident. Next, let's talk about everyone's favorite stuttering pig, Porky Pig. It was a Porky Pig short where Daffy Duck made his first appearance, meaning he actually existed before Daffy. Another interesting and random fact about Porky is that his stutter comes from his original voice actor, Joe Doherty, who actually had a speech impediment. But yeah, Porky Pig used to be the main Looney Tunes character. He was considered by many in the late 30s and throughout the 40s to be the top billing character for the franchise.
Yeah, that's real interesting.
Porky served for a long time as an everyman by the Looney Tunes team. Oh, for fuck's sake, man, what do you want now?
Come on, man, is this supposed to be the living roster or a history lesson on Looney Tunes characters?
Well, I have to explain some history to give a good reason to have someone included.
Well, you sure are leaning really hard into the history side of things. You know what I think? I think you're stalling.
Oh, really? And why's that?
Because Porky is a horrible choice for MultiVersus.
No way, Porky's great.
Sure, Porky's cool and all, but the guy is a nervous wreck. He avoids conflict at all costs.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I guess that's true. But I was about to talk about how they shifted his character focus in the 50s to support other characters like Daffy.
Yeah, they did, which only proves the point that he can't work on his own.
But I'm not done. What I'm saying is that when he teams up with someone like Daffy, it's only because of Porky that Daffy finds any success at all. He's the only one that helps Daffy get out of situations.
Okay, then make a point that he needs to be part of Daffy's moveset then.
But I don't want that. No one wants Daffy to have to share the spotlight, especially not Daffy himself.
Then my point stands.
Shit. You know, you've been really getting on my nerves lately, but this time you actually did make a good point. Okay, I'll come up with someone else.
Good call.
Well, that's fine. We've got plenty of options. So instead of Porky Pig, let's do Sylvester and Tweety. It's true that they could end up being in the game as their own characters, but their show very much relied on each other to work. Now, it's probably no surprise that Tweety and Sylvester may have started out as one thing, but they very quickly became influenced by Tom and Jerry, which was very popular at the time. Evidence of this can be found in the show itself when, early on, the owner actually refers to Sylvester by calling him Thomas. But similarities between them and Tom and Jerry aside, there are actually plenty of differences. For one, Sylvester and Tweety's adventures tend to be in much more varied locations, but beyond that, they talk, which is something Tom and Jerry notably don't do. I think Sylvester and Tweety actually do make more sense because Tom and Jerry have already made it into the game. And I'd love to see the gags and things that player-first games might actually reference with their movesets. I imagine they'd probably be a mage or ranged class much like Tom and Jerry, so that's what I'd suggest we add them as. The next option I want to discuss is Wiley, Coyote, and the Roadrunner. Yes, another duo. Wiley and Roadrunner are absolutely one of the most unique and successful shows from the Looney Tunes franchise. I recommend them as a duo because, like Sylvester and Tweety, they just don't tend to work as well on their own. Roadrunner almost exclusively exists to be a foil to Wiley, but Wiley is a very creative and smart character. Even if he does fail every time to catch Roadrunner, it's by design that it never has anything to do with his capabilities and everything else to do with his luck. Wiley, at a fundamental level, is incredibly unlucky, but I think they could use this to their advantage as a character design. Have him set up his props and traps, and have Roadrunner serve as a catalyst to set them off. Maybe even have a consequence to him, kind of like Pichu in Smash, where all of his attacks, or at least most of them, damage him a certain low percentage, so he ends up as a very high risk but high reward character. And like I alluded to, Roadrunner should probably just make appearances in his moveset rather than accompanying him all the time. I imagine this aspect would work a bit like Rocket and Groot do in MultiVersus Capcom Infinite, where Groot is present but not at all times. Then, for one of my personal favorites, the Tasmanian Devil. Taz is actually probably the easiest to add in. While he wasn't present often in Looney Tunes segments, he was a huge draw. The artist that created him thought that he was a one-off, but when he heard from Jack Warner that fans were constantly writing in to request more Taz, he made an effort to get Taz in many more skits. Taz is one of the very few characters in the Looney Tunes library that's perfectly capable on his own with no additional props. His native ability to turn into the Tasmanian Devil as we know him and become a tornado that causes destruction all around him is very, very easy to implement in a lot of ways, at least from a theoretical perspective, though he may have some difficulties with implementation. I imagine he could have a few different attacks where his tornado attack can be used in varying ways. He could use it to capture opponents, he could throw his opponents at high velocity with it. As I said, there are a number of options. For other attacks, you could have him use his massive mouth and teeth to bite and chomp. I just think that Taz has so much potential, I'll be disappointed if we don't see him at some point in MultiVersus. Due to the nature of him needing to be up close, I think he'd best function as a brawler, but it's probably possible to have him as a tank as well. And for the last one, I went between Elmer, Fudd, and Yosemite Sam, not because they're both the same, because they're very much not, but they both use guns, and so they probably would fill a similar archetypal function. As I'm writing this, I'm gonna go ahead and choose Yosemite Sam here, because as much of a fan as I am of Elmer, Yosemite, I think, has much more versatility. Not only did he end up in a range of style of thematic episodes, but he's also got a much more rambunctious personality, making him, I suspect, much more interesting to watch and play. His dual-wielded 6-shooters could be used in a number of ways. He could simply have his guns operate as his primary form of attack. Down shots, up shots, side shots, double shots, etc. And with his cowboy aesthetic, you could even have him have some interesting abilities through his very large hat, and maybe even something with a lasso. With the moveset as I'm explaining it, I feel like he best fits the mage and ranged class, but I'm not sure. Maybe I'm overlooking something. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Alright, and with the 5 options of today's poll talked about, let's get to the results of the last episode of the MultiVersus Living Roster. Last week I asked you all what Hanna-Barbera cartoon you thought was most likely to make it into MultiVersus at launch. Here are the results. I was actually expecting the Jetsons to win this one pretty easily, but this episode ended up being the closest vote we've had so far, or at least one of the closest. Either way, by some miracle, one of my most wanted characters ended up taking the win. With the results of the last poll, Space Ghost is the winner, which I'm super stoked for. Okay, so let's get to the poll for this episode. After everything we talked about, which Looney Tunes character do you think is most likely to make it into MultiVersus at launch? Daffy Duck, Sylvester and Tweety, Wiley, Coyote and the Roadrunner, the Tasmanian Devil, or Yosemite Sam? To vote in the poll, you can go to the channel's community page. The poll for this week will be at the very top of that page. While you're there, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. Or if you'd rather, I've created a custom poll at a website called Straw Poll. To get to this poll, just look for the link in the description, or you can find it in the pinned comment on the top of this video's comment section. All right, everyone, that's today's episode. I apologize if I wasn't able to name your favorite Looney Tunes character. If there's a character I didn't mention today that you think would be a better fit, let me know who you think it would be down in the comments, and I'll try to make sure to make them a priority for a future poll. I also want to use the end of this episode to invite all of you guys that are still here to the Discord channel I made for our community here. I wanted a place where I can talk to you guys between videos, discuss ideas, living roster predictions, and more. If you want to join in, you can find the link in the description or in the pinned comment. Thank you everyone for your continued support. Thank you all for coming by. I hope you enjoyed, and until next time, later.